I'm really quite excited to be with you guys in Dublin for, actually 3 reasons. The first is I'm a big fan of the Engineers Without Borders movement around the world. I think it's really, really important. And so coming together and these events like this, these rather sort of important legal formal events, I think is, quite important, and I'm really sort of pleased to see the EWB movement growing in Ireland. So thank you for inviting me. The second reason is that we actually, Field Ready and Engineers Without Borders Ireland are in the process of arranging for some of the Where There Is No Engineer Challenge winners to spend some time in our programs that we set up in Kathmandu in Nepal after the earthquakes in 2015. And the third reason is that this is my first trip to Ireland since you guys very kindly gave me nationality here. So thank you for being my lifeboat from Brexit Britain, and my granddad, who's from Cavan, and who got married and had the honeymoon in this city, would be very pleased. So thank you. I was very happy to use my Irish passport for the first time on this trip today. So I've sort of, I walked into this room and thought this is such a lovely space. There's a workshop I'd like to quickly do. So I'm going to actually spend less time talking about Field Ready and then try and squeeze in a workshop and not interfere with Olivia's presentation too much, hopefully. And we'll do some Q&A after the workshop. Is that all right? Good, because that's what's going to happen. Because I went out shopping for biscuits and towels to make the workshop happen. Emergence is something that happens in complex systems, in complex environments, complex contexts, not necessarily the kind of context that engineers are trained for, because we're trained to be very linear, very project-orientated in our work. But increasingly the problems that we're facing, such as the SDGs, are non-linear. So what we have to do is to create the conditions for solutions to emergence. So this idea of sort of being able to engineer emergence, even in places like Syria, is more about sort of that building capacity idea that Declan talked about in the introduction. So, the quality's a bit poor, isn't it? Sorry about that. Since I thought I'd mention Nepal, since we're going to be working with Engineers Without Borders Ireland there. These are the kind of stories that emerged in the media after the earthquakes in 2015, late April and early May 2015. Basically, aid piling up at the airport. The tarmac of the only international airport in the country was being damaged because the planes were coming in too heavy, full of aid. Systems have failed. You can't get aid out into the hills, even by yak, because all the roads have collapsed and landslides and so on. 60 to 80% of all of the income that goes into humanitarian relief is spent on buying stuff and moving stuff, depending on the year, depending on where it is. The budget's actually increased since this research was done. The annual aid budget is, I think, around $25 billion a year now, just looking at aid agencies. And one of the defining characteristics of a disaster, in fact, of disasters generally, is severe logistical challenges. But the point is, there are always local capabilities. And so one of the things that Field Ready is trying to do is to line up some of the more high-tech technologies that engineers are used to working with, perhaps in places like Dublin, with some of these severe logistical challenges, so that we can make things locally. And doing things faster, if you can make it locally, you don't need to ship. You don't need to bring it in. You can often be better than the standard aid products because you can customize to the individual, for example, or you can make improvements and spare parts, and you can often be a hell of a lot cheaper because the supply chains are often so expensive. So we're trying to go from the typical aid supply chain, which might look like something like this, to something that looks a bit more like this, and actually manufacturing in communities. And then trying to scale that up, networking together, manufacturing capacity, basically, you know, just creating connections between people, but also sort of sharing design files openly, or you know, other sort of capacity building work, so that we can create what the core of our innovation is, which we call networked local manufacturing. And we're trying to bring this change into the aid sector. It is absolutely crazy that we're shipping stuff around the world into these disaster zones. We're trying to ship stuff into Bangladesh, which is one of the manufacturing hubs of the planet. And it's just because of the heritage that we've had almost ever since the Industrial Revolution, but also because of the way logistics in the aid sector has been built up. And it's actually those bureaucracies can be quite hard to change. The most beneficial areas for local manufacturing are in prototypes, to show people how to make things themselves, repairs, fixes, spare parts that you otherwise can't get, they're unavailable on the market anymore, customized parts to individual people, and also making the molds needed for mass production. These are bars of soap with little animals, toy animals inside them to encourage children to wash their hands, which is quite important at the moment. And we don't really have a linear process. This is a sort of misleading image in some ways, because local manufacturing, making stuff with people, lends itself to an iterative process. So we do assess, design, make a couple of times in a couple of hours. You go from identifying a problem that someone's having to, you know, potentially a 3D printed object with a prototype stage in between very quickly. And then we share our designs, we publish them openly, we deliver training courses, and then we come and do talks like this to try and encourage people to change the world. This is Addie, and she's in an evacuation. The building behind is an evacuation center for the Ambai earthquake in Vanuatu, Ambai volcano in Vanuatu. Ambai is an island in the Pacific Ocean, part of the network of islands that make up the country of Vanuatu. The volcano erupted, the government evacuated the island. A lot of the people didn't really have anywhere to go. This was a recently Chinese-built, as yet unused cruise ship terminal. Just imagine like an empty airport terminal, but you know, no furniture whatsoever. And all of the most vulnerable people, pregnant women, very old people, people with disabilities, people with mental health problems, were put into that place so they could be cared for. The problem is they didn't have any furniture. The aid agencies were trying to procure furniture, which meant shipping beds from China, $180 a pop. It was never going to happen. Addie walked down to the local hardware store 600 meters away. Can we borrow some materials? I mean, in the end, we literally just borrowed them. We did a bit of prototyping, bit of consultation. What we realized was they didn't actually want beds. That was the wrong specification to be designing a solution for. What they wanted was not to sleep on the floor. So we actually just borrowed planks of wood, plywood and some concrete blocks, and then put these battens up with these blankets. They were only there for 6 weeks. When the evacuation was over and people returned to the island, all of those materials went back on the shelves in the hardware store. We came up with a design which meant you didn't need to cut or you didn't need to drill or anything. So all of those materials went back on the hardware store's shelves, and the hardware store was happy to help. A lot cheaper than $180 a bed. Really important to build skills, so you know, this is Abby, one of our engineers, field engineers, training a local woman how to use vernier calipers to take measurements, because we were in her community taking measurements and it just looks like a weird, they've never seen that activity before, so you know, it should be something that anybody could do. So the idea is that we show the head of the women's group what we're doing, and hopefully make it more reasonable as it could be something that they could do as well. Remote 3D printing in IDB camps fixing spare parts for water pumping stations in Nepal, engaging with people directly on what kind of products they need, helping local entrepreneurs make things like medical devices and maker spaces, going out into the field with your 3D printer in the back, helping local entrepreneurs prototype to then enable mass production. This guy got an order for 120,000 cook stoves, I think it was, based off a mold on a single 3D print. Doing training out in the field. It's really important to show people that we can run our printers off solar panels, because it's always a question that comes up. But the idea is make it locally, and trying to train local people like Osama. He didn't actually need much training. He's in Idlib in Syria at the moment. Absolutely incredible engineers in Syria, and he's one of them. And he set up a workshop on a project with us, did some prototyping, developed some designs for heavy lift airbags, did some testing. Actually, we did a lot of the testing in Istanbul, and came up with these products, which are basically using the materials you can find at a truck stop. If you can see at the back, just above his bum there, you put the airbag into the building, you inflate the airbag, you lift up the collapsed building, and you can pull out the people who are trapped inside. All made with local materials, nothing shipped in. All the designs are open source. You could go on tonight and download them if you want to make them yourselves. They come with a health warning, because if these things blow up, you've got to make sure they're really, really well made. So quality control is one of the challenges if you're trying to make things locally. But by doing things like that, you can be essentially cheaper, better, faster, and supporting local businesses. In the future, we can imagine the idea of, you've got your spare part up in the Himalayas, the thing you've got your broken part in the Himalayas, a drone comes and picks it up, takes it to the local makerspace, make up a new version, take the drone back again. We're creating an internet of production by creating standards to try and move not just the humanitarian sector, but manufacturing generally, from this sort of globalized mass manufacturing to a localized, decentralized manufacturing by the masses. That's the kind of vision of the future that we're trying to instill. You can sign up. And we do, so there's data standards and things like that we're developing to underpin all of that. I want to quickly run through, by the way, that's the fastest I've ever done that presentation. So if it's overwhelming and stuff, I apologize, but the game is quite fun. So we're going to concentrate on that. Humanitarian relief, unlike poverty reduction, development, capacity building type change, requires a different kind of accountability, and there are all sorts of different sources of law that humanitarian responders have to adhere to, but also codes of conduct, such as the Red Cross Code of Conduct, the Sphere Guidelines, and essentially the underpinning principles are humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. And if you're part of the Red Cross movement, you might also sign up to these as well. Voluntary service, for example, means you cannot be ordered. If you're a humanitarian worker, you're not working necessarily for a company that's told you to go on pain of losing your job, or a military government agency that's told you to go on pain of, court-martial or whatever. It's voluntary. But humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence are the governing ideas behind humanitarianism. And really, there's all these policy frameworks coming up, but the thing that Engineers Without Borders is really helping with and changing in the world is this idea, through things like the Where There Is No Engineer challenge, is really helping to introduce new kinds of thinking, of understanding, of being able to meet the world on its own terms, to recognize when you're operating in a complex or chaotic non-linear domain, and quite frankly, capacity building as opposed to a project might be more useful, for example. It's a way of sort of being able to create, as we're doing in manufacturing, more adaptive responses that can change. We don't turn up in a disaster response knowing what we're going to make, knowing what we're going to supply. What we turn up with is the capability, and we try and very quickly identify local capabilities to be able to respond to whatever comes up day by day, hour by hour. I think I've already talked about this. That is the shipping of a bucket for the Nepal earthquake. There are plenty of bucket making factories in Nepal. Right, the game. So basically I walked in the room and thought I'd really like to do a workshop that I used to do quite a bit with Engineers Without Borders, and it's about exploring the concept of what it is to be without borders. Would you mind all standing up and joining over here, please? Would you like to volunteer to describe what your team did when I said ready, steady, go? Or even before that, what happened?
We didn't empower this person.
They didn't what?
Empower the person.
Oh, already jumped into it. More specifically, what actually did they do? Describe the practical things that happened when I said those are the rules of the game. On their own?
Ask for more rules.
Ask for more rules?
They did it themselves.
Did what themselves?
They got the biscuits themselves and gave it to
Got the biscuits themselves and gave, yeah? What else happened?
They didn't have a plan. They decided what they were going to do together.
They what?
They decided what they were going to do together. They made a plan.
Thank you. My hearing's a bit, I haven't popped from the aeroplane, so sorry. Bit more detail. Let's really get into this. What actually happened? Let's describe, go through what this team actually did.
Communicated.
Yeah. When?
When we had to.
Sorry, is the question to that side alone or this side as well?
This side at the moment.
No, I mean like
We'll do a compare and contrast. Yeah. Do you want to describe what they did?
No, I'm asking whether you are asking those guys to answer
I'm
or
asking those guys to answer. Yeah.
okay.
Well, I'll tell you what I saw. Yeah, feel free. I saw. Did you both walk up?
Yeah.
Did you both walk up?
Yeah.
But one of you picked it up, not you didn't both pick it up.
When I was going to go up and then you said, oh, just about 3 seconds, and you said, oh, but,
Yeah.
which confused me.
Okay. And then you put the biscuit into your mouth, and you ate it?
And then I paid it.
Okay. Then what happened? What did you start doing after that?
Took off the.
Took off?
Not what I saw them do with her.
Okay. Okay. So you saw what was happening over there, and you
Yeah,
decided to.
But I just remember that you'd said get him to put, or them put the biscuit in their mouth.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I missed that part myself.
Yeah. The importance of every single word in the instructions. Yeah. Can someone describe what this group did, step by step?
So they kind of looked at the situation.
Yes.
I suppose who was in a vulnerable position.
Yeah.
And then instead of kind of assessing it with the being the vulnerable person, they knew what had to be done, just like in the Nepal earthquake. And so they came over here for the bucket, essentially.
Yeah.
And then they went back without actually, they dived straight
This is
into
very
it.
deep. You're getting very into it. Well done, Engineers Without Borders.
They dived straight
So
into
the same thing more or less happened, which was that one of you came to collect it. What did this guy do? What did,
You tried to sabotage the other team.
tried to sabotage the other team?
I was going to help them.
You were helping them. Okay. It was hard to tell whether you were helping.
Did you tell her that you were going to get the biscuits? Did you know?
That's okay.
You knew you were getting the business.
You went over there and came back instead of me just going over there.
Well done.
Okay.
Did they ask you what you wanted them to do, or did they tell you what they were going to do?
get
I
it.
don't remember, but I asked
That-
them
that's-
if they could
We
get
tried
you
to
the
discuss
biscuits,
it.
because I couldn't.
Yeah, that's what should have happened. I
We
was just-
discussed.
I didn't know.
That would actually take more
Was
time. Like,
were they allowed to take the?
Yeah.
on town
Were they allowed to untie me?
I didn't give any rules.
But there's the
I
guy
said,
going.
I want people to eat biscuits, please.
Yeah, okay. The instructions you gave
Yeah,
was to give biscuits
yeah,
to the 2 people who are blindfolded.
yeah,
And I think you gave 60 seconds
Exactly.
for that to be done. So the one of the 2, well, actually one of them first took a shot. I don't know whether it's part of the team.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
It's nice to see we have some photographers around. Yeah, thank
and
you.
then his colleague went to bring the biscuits.
Yeah,
And when he got it back, the blindfold was removed,
Yeah.
and a biscuit was given to her.
the blindfold first, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was
No, I think it was
Oh, sorry. The hands were
Okay.
and then the blindfold before the biscuits was given to her.
Thank you.
I should have just walked over there. They should have taken my blindfold.
But you were tied up.
Yeah, but they could have just taken them off and I would have
I
gone
didn't
there.
realize that they.
Now they
Interesting.
went there
It's almost
and
like you
pulled-
had borders that needed to be removed. That you needed to become without borders of some kind.
Yeah.
I'm going to really dig into this horrendous metaphor for a little while.
Shouldn't the girl, like, I thought that the girl was going to be helped, assisted to come here, because he didn't tell you about the race. So they had 60 seconds, she could come with them.
I did say when he said he'd go, so, and there is a human behaviour that kicks in to think that everything is a race, everything is competition. But yeah, you're absolutely
But I
right.
really thought that she was going, like, hopping with their assistant.
And the thing
Because
is,
he said that she had to pick up the biscuits.
well, I said to eat the biscuits.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you were being tied up before you could see where the biscuits were going,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
But
So
they could help.
they could help.
We tried
Right.
to discuss the options to see which one would be better. So we did discuss that option.
And what was your definition of better?
Oh, better, yeah.
We weren't
The
sure,
race.
but we thought there was a risk that we wouldn't get it complete in time if we were carrying the person over there.
Great.
So we decided, no, that's not so good.
So you
Sean
took
suggested
the
we should
lowest
rule that.
risk option,
We thought.
which is do it yourself, because you have control over yourself, not necessarily of everything else in the context.
Yeah.
Thank you. How did you feel when you were tied up?
Fine.
Did you know what? I'm going to have to really spell this out. Did you know what was going on?
To an extent, not 100%, to an extent, but not completely. There was a level of, well, I guess I wasn't in my complete zone. I guess there was, I didn't have like complete mobility.
Yeah.
I was restricted.
Did you feel like, was that a very comfortable situation for you to be in? Did you want to have been put in that situation after you found out what you were signed up for?
I didn't mind too much, but yeah, no.
All right.
Like the young man's
Good.
question
Okay.
to make it.
How did you feel?
I would say the same way, but interestingly, I felt very comfortable until my feet were tied together. Because
Okay.
if I were blindfolded and had my hands behind my back, I would be fine. I was like, I could do this. But
Yeah.
with the feet, I couldn't walk,
Okay.
and I would be very likely to trip.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was very restraining.
That's a very trust.
That's why I didn't know that I could be untied, so I asked them if they could get the
Okay.
biscuits, because that seemed to be the safest option for me as well, but I didn't know
Thank you.
that they could.
Who are these two? Who do they represent in this case?
The people in the top, or the
Affected people affected by poverty or disaster. Who are the people helping them?
They were-
Aid workers. People like members of Engineers Without Borders. Who am I in this?
Government.
Very nice.
Legislation.
I'm the one that's providing you biscuits. In this case, I'd like to think of myself as a donor. I took my 10% overheads as I was. Where did the biscuits end up, out of interest?
I
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. What do the biscuits represent? Aid. Yeah. Where did the aid end up? Some of it ended up. Also, I didn't say which biscuits you had to get. There was a really nice pack of boxes, chunky.
We actually discussed that. That was discussed.
And,
I sit there and
who are you guys?
Other affected people.
Other affected people, the general public, potentially people who have much better ideas of what these organisations should do to respond than the organisations do. Yeah? Who's this guy?
CNN.
Taking photos. Right. Thank you. The whole thing is a big metaphor, as you can tell. And the first time I played this game, thank you. Coming back to the government. Showing the title. Goes back to the people who have the money in the first place. The first time I did this game, it was on and it's quite a facile thing to do, to try and compare all of the world's problems as a blindfold, whereas, bits of tower to cut up, all of the barriers that people affect people. It's quite a facile thing to do, but the reason I feel I can do that is because I spent a month learning about participatory development in India with communities. We played this game at the end of that month. This was in 2005, before I started working for Engineers Without Borders. And what we did, I was one of the aid workers, and what we did in our team is, after doing a month's worth of training on participatory development, me and my aid worker friend, we went and talked to each other in the corner like this to make a plan. We lifted the person up and we ran with them. Grabbed the biscuits, smashed it over our knees, biscuits flying everywhere, put it in the mouth. We've won. Oh my God. Well, this is the simplest, the most simple way of achieving what I was saying. You were the first to speak. Of what I was saying, what the rules of the game were. What was the most simple way to achieve it? Empower them by, in this, removing the ties. Even simpler than that. What would you do first?
Communicate.
Inform them. But you have, what action would you take first?
Take off their blindfold.
Their blindfold? Potentially. They don't want to look at you lot. What's going on? The simplest way to solve the problem that I can think of is to untie the hands, and then they can decide if they untie themselves the rest of the time. So it taught me about the idea, and there's absolutely no, thank you for participating, there's no shame in any of this, because I spent a month doing this, and that was my response. Like, I've done this game maybe 50 times, I've never seen anyone untie the hand first. We are trained in the West to think in terms of competition, in terms of projects, in terms of following rules, even when there aren't any, and we have to kind of ask for more rules, as you were saying. And the thing about the Without Borders movement and some of the philosophy that goes with it for me is not necessarily that where I thought it started, which was about going to other countries and going across national boundaries. It wasn't even about sort of overcoming technological barriers or building skills and doing capacity building necessarily. It was finding that one thing that you wanted to remove. Ultimately, for me, it became about sort of this idea about a new way of thinking of rejecting the game if you have to. And, you know, finding what's the one thing that you can do that will make a difference, the simplest thing that you can do when you're face to face with people who might be asking for assistance. Now, I didn't actually ask you if you wanted help. I set that up because it's a game. I don't even know if you like biscuits or if they're culturally appropriate to you or whatever. But anyway, if you need gluten-free biscuits, then I'm really sorry.
He did ask me if I like chocolate biscuits.
Oh, right, okay. So, not lactose intolerant. And the idea for me now is very much about trying to engage, not so much in trying to in sort of trying to install technology or set it up for the sake of it, or it's more about sort of embracing the world as it is and recognizing the complexity is there, rather than trying to projectize it, linearize it with all of these equations and management tools that we're taught in engineering school, and more about sort of a more human, more humanitarian way of engaging. And the reason I play this game is because whenever I'm in that sort of situation, I remember this game and I think my default behavior is to think of the competition, to think of the race, to treat it like a project. And I always kind of stop myself in my instincts that I learned in university and as an engineer growing up playing Lego and Meccano and whatever, and try to think, what is the without borders way of doing it? And that goes back to what Declan was saying at the very start of the AGM today. Shall we sit down? Thank you very much. You know, this is the paradigm of things in the physical world, neo-Newtonian practice. This is the reason why aeroplanes fly and everything, because we know exactly how every rivet performs. This is what engineers have to be really good at to be professionals. But we also need to have behaviors of adaptive pluralism to be able to find different ways of working. All of these slides will be available. You can send them around. To recognize which domain you're working in. Are you working in a non-linear domain where you have to act and see what happens, or where you have to try things out and see what happens, see how the system responds? Or is it as linear as a light switch, where you do the same thing twice and you get the same result? That doesn't happen when you go from one pilot project to the next. You know, the one village to the next, the project changes. Or if it's complicated, engineers are basically all about trying to work in that domain up there. With all of our second order differential equations and Fourier transforms, it's all about linearizing within certain bounds a nonlinear world. There are techniques like variety engineering, which is about the relationship between a system and its controllers, and the viable systems model, which is looking at the sustainability of any system, no matter where you draw the boundary. So there's all sorts of things you can learn about this. The idea is, ultimately, to try and help everyone to realize their own recovery. And I think what Engineers Without Borders is doing with the Where There Is No Engineer Challenge is essentially introducing some of this mindset, even if perhaps these sorts of theory that I've just raced through isn't in the curriculum yet, at least getting people to be in a disposition where they can embrace this sort of stuff. So for that reason, I'm very grateful to Engineers Without Borders for the work it does here. And I'm very happy to share these slides so you can look more into some of that theory and some of the non-linear, how you handle non-linear situations. But if you have any questions on that, how much time do I